phallic in its understandings. We're going to get to more of this coming. And of course, that will be shocking to a good number of readers. They're like, what in the world are we looking at? He will, of course, level theology and metaphysics to the body itself, which is truly remarkable. And then he begins with this word if, which is, of course, a very interesting epistemological fallibilist position. If I worship, he just mentioned churches, right? If I worship one thing more than another, it shall be the spread of my own body or any part of it. And of course, readers of this poem were already thinking out loud, oh good heavens, where is he headed to now? He's talked about armpits, where are we going to next? Translucent mold of me, it shall be you. Now we're going to get 14, count them up, at least, of these it shall be you mantras. It's as if we're reading some kind of amazing song, and we're hearing it played out. Translucent mold of me, it shall be you. Shaded ledges and rests, it shall be you. And of course, he's talking now about different parts of his body. Firm, masculine coulter, that is to say that prong which directs the plow right into the turf. I mean, nobody had thought about that in any kind of phallic imagery before Whitman. And of course, once it's done, it becomes then, oh, good heavens. Firm, masculine. Remember, I told you his use of the word masculine, and he likes to use it. So go back and look at all of Lisa Grass in the way. Masculinity. Firm, masculine culture, it shall be you. By the way, in the 55 edition, there are not all these exclamation points. I'll let you count up the total number of these things. It's amazing. He clearly is getting now very ecstatic and excited in his statements. Whatever goes to the tilth of me, it shall be you. That is to say, the tillage, right, of the soil itself. You, my rich blood, your milky stream, pale strippings of my life. Obviously, there's all kinds of sexual language here. Breast that presses against other breasts, it shall be you. Obviously, passage 5 immediately comes to mind. Some readers will say, you know, passage 5 is pretty radical, but this is actually just as radical. My brain, it shall be your occult convulsions, which is interesting. He uses the word occult after password from earlier. Root of washed sweet flag, timorous pond snipe, nest of guarded duplicate eggs, it shall be you. And obviously the phallic imagery here is self-evident. Mixed, tussled hay of head, obviously taking us back to passage 9 and these echoes. Beard, go back again. I told you from our study of Milton's Paradise Lost, hair matters in Milton, it matters in Whitman. Beard, broad, back to the masculinity, it shall be you. Trickling sap of maple, fiber of manly wheat, it shall be you. And it's at this point, readers in 55 are ready to just go, oh, you gotta be kidding me. This would be Emerson, in fact, his own observation. By the time we get to the Calamus poems, we'll be ready to read those poems because of this kind of stuff. But man, I cannot tell you how iconoclastically challenging this kind of poetry was. I can't help, and this is why we quote that, you know, from passage 4, both in and out of the game and watching and wondering at it, I witness and wait. Whitman's having a lot of fun. You get the sense that there's a certain kind of exuberant joy here. Whitman's having a lot of fun as he's playing this game, right? Trickling sap of maple, fiber of manly wheat, it shall be you. Sun so generous, it shall be you. Of course, sun here will come back when we talk about the sun, the sunrise. Vapors lightening and shading my face, it shall be you. You sweaty brooks and dews, it shall be you. It's as if he's imagining his body is a work of nature. And then a line that, I mean, at this point, some people just said, well, he's way crossed over the line at this point. Winds whose soft tickling genitals rub against me, it shall be you. And again, it's like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. The wind's crotch nuzzles against your body. What? Broad, muscular feels, we're back, of course, from masculine. Branches of live oak, we're going to get to more oak in Louisiana later in Leaves of Grass. Loving lounger in my winding paths, it shall be you. We think of lounger, we think of loaf, observing a spear of summer grass. All of these echoes are coming back, which is why I've made the argument. I don't think you can really read T.S. Eliot we have argued, the greatest poet of the 20th century, with maybe Wallace Stevens as well there, but I don't think you can read T.S. Eliot without really appreciating the debt he owes to Whitman, even though he himself never wanted to admit it. My words echo thus in your mind, but to what purpose? Disturbing the dust on a bowl of rose leaves, I do not know. Other echoes inhabit the garden, shall we follow? Broad, muscular fields, branches of live oak, loving lounger in my winding paths it shall be you. Hands I've taken, face I've kissed, mortal I have ever touched, it shall be you. And then he doubles down. I dote on myself. There is that lot of me, and all so luscious. Each moment, and whatever happens, thrills me with joy. Again, that I stand for the sunny point of view. I cannot tell how my ankles bend, nor whence the cause of my faintest wish, nor the cause of the friendship I admit, nor the cause of the friendship I take again. Now this notion of cause, factoring right into his study, of course, of Emerson, that idea of, can you explain how things work? Like, for example, how your ankles bend. To show a bean in its pond confounds the learning of all time, he'll say later in passage 48. Or, where do your thoughts come from? We have this tendency to, of course, think that we are in control, and yet, where do these thoughts come from that seem to just arise from nowhere? Of course, genius, poetic genius, like what we're reading here now, obviously begs the question, where does all this come from for Whitman? And how is it possible that he would wait so many years, over 3 decades, before all of a sudden this stuff just comes out in all of these kind of amazing lines? He says, I got no idea about causes, the cause of friendship in either direction. And then he says that I walk up my stoop, I pause to consider if it really be. And then he's got another line that he edited out, which I just want to pay attention to for just a second. He says, that I eat and drink is spectacle enough for the great authors in schools. It's an amazing line, and it sounds very Wordsworthian, doesn't it? That I eat and drink is spectacle enough for the great authors in schools. Spectacle, password, oracle. He edits the line out, but I want to point it out anyway, because it's such a beautiful, such an amazing line. And then, of course, a famous line, a morning glory at my window satisfies me more than the metaphysics of books. Many have said this is one of the most beautiful lines. Just look at the flowers right outside our window here next to Ruthie's tree, and it will blow your mind. It defies explanation. It's more satisfying than all the metaphysics of books. Now, we're going to get to a poem called When I Heard the Learned Astronomer, and we're going to play the same kind of game. To go out and experience nature is way more compelling than reading about it. Remember, Whitman started out as a teacher, but he was a teacher who believed in experiential learning, more than just reading it in a book. He then is going to go to this admonition that will sound very Thoreau-like from Walden about the daybreak. And in many ways, the procreative impulse of the individual will give way to the cosmic energies that will be symbolized in many ways in the sunrise. Norton's is going to help us here. To behold the daybreaks, notice exclamation point. The little light fades the immense and diaphanous shadows. The air tastes good to my palate. Well, this is, of course, Thoreau's famous line, we must learn to reawaken and keep ourselves awake, not by mechanical aids, but by an infinite expectation of the dawn. I really think that Whitman is definitely playing around with very similar ideas. Of course, Thoreau will publish those lines in a year before, right? In 54, a year before when we get these lines in Leaves of Grass, Song of Myself. And then he says it this way, Hefs, it's a fun word, it's an American word, right? Hefs of the moving world at innocent gambols, he always loves his imagery of walking, silently rising, freshly exuding, scooting, obliquely high and low. Hey, you guys, you remember when I said you got to read this stuff out loud? Listen to this line again. It's so amazing. Hefs, hear all the ing sounds. Hefs of the moving world at innocent gambols, silently rising, freshly exuding, scooting, obliquely high and low. It's a beautiful line. And of course, you gotta love any poet that knows how to use the word scoot, right? It's wonderful. And then he says it, to finish now this set of lines. Something I cannot see puts upward libidinous prongs, seas of bright juice suffuse heaven. Now, Harold Bloom, very iconoclastically, to follow in the tradition of Whitman, argued that Whitman was actually very impressed with a certain Egyptian cosmogonic origination, creation story that postulated that all of the world was in fact ejaculated through a action of autoeroticism, masturbation, and that's how the whole world comes into existence, an Egyptian and possibly Babylonian myth. It's an interesting speculation. We're certainly playing around here with some of these kinds of bright, juice, suffuse heaven language, and it's at this point that a lot of readers in 1855 just shut the book and said, I'm sorry, I just can't do this anymore. It's too immodest to use the language that he was using earlier. But then he finishes with 3 these. The earth by the sky stayed with, the daily close of their injunction, as, notice we go from sunrise to sunset. They heaved challenge from the east that moment over my head as daybreak. The mocking taunt. Now we're going to get to more of this mocking taunt throughout Leaves of Grass, as if Whitman already knew that people are going to kind of mock his celebration of all things bodily, right? The mocking taunt. See then whether you shall be master. Now, this is interesting because it ends with an exclamation point, and it does beg the question, what in heaven's name are we reading? And more interestingly, ontologically, who is this guy that's creating these kinds of things? See, he says, are you going to be the master? There is a certain, I think, attempt to try to suggest humility here, right? T.S. Eliot will say, the only wisdom we can hope to acquire is the wisdom of humility. Humility is endless. And I think that to pay attention to the sunrise will lead one to a certain kind of humility, would be our argument. Well, let's finish here at 2a, themes, messages. I mean, this stuff blows us away, right? I mean, 2a, the poet, the artist, includes everything, right? It shall be you 14 times, right? At 2b, the repetitions, the echoes are compelling. The allusions, I think as well, that would make readers who had just recently read Thoreau's Walden sit up and go, wow, there's some games that are being played here back and forth between the two. There's a reason that Thoreau took Alcott and went to visit Walt Whitman, and he invited them up into his bedroom that he did not rearrange to make it look cleaner or any of that. They were a bit offended by it all. We've mentioned at 3a Walden, we'll mention Emerson, of course, and especially his essay Nature. I want to mention, though, here our study of Emily Dickinson, because it seems to me that a whole lot of the games that are being played, and I like that word from Passage 4, Song of Myself, are very much Dickinson-like games as well. And it is compelling to kind of compare the two poets when you start to play around. I think and I was recently asked, okay, if you're doing all of the poems of Leaves of Grass, are you going to turn around then and do all the poems of the collected works of Emily Dickinson, because that's only fair? And you know what? That student who said that to me is absolutely right, because when we start playing around with Dickinson, we'll come back and go, hey guys, do you remember when we were playing the same game with Whitman? It's a compelling moment in time. It makes you proud to be an American to know that these two poets, Emily Dickinson and Walt Whitman, were contemporaries, and they were doing such amazing writing during a similar time. Finally, at 3b, it's the ontological question, right? Whitman says, I'll tell you who I am, right? An American, one of the roughs, although edited out ultimately, but the question obviously is the ontological question. Who are you? Who are you anyway? And to what degree can you understand yourself better through close analysis of a set of lines like this? I hope that that's happening for you, and I hope that you're enjoying our study together and our talks with Walt. Thank you.